This is Memorial Day weekend. So I want to ask you this question, first of all. I guess I need to tell you that anybody who knows me well knows that I am a military movie buff. And I've watched probably every one that's been out. And you know why? Because I love people that have the spirit of being a warrior. We need that back in the church. You know, I remember a few years ago when I was pastoring a church, there was some discussion about taking, we don't sing out of the hymn book anymore, but you remember the song Onward Christian Soldiers? That there was a movement to take that out of the hymn book. And I remember my district superintendent said to me one time, well, if we're not going to live like soldiers of God and Christ anymore, maybe we should take it out. You know, and people say, well, I don't know if I want to be militant and all that. I want you to know that within all of us, God has given us a warrior spirit. And when you look at the last week of Jesus' life, you'll see it there too. And it's important for us to do it. And I want to ask you this question. If you were I'm going to contemporize this as something that happened. If you were in the mall packed with people, and you saw, undoubtedly, a man going towards the middle of a mall filled with people who was wearing a suicide vest with his hand on the plunger, what would you do? I think for me, I'd probably be glad my mom told me about carrying that second set of underwear with me everywhere I went. What would you do? I mean, think about it. Do you think that's not reality after this week, what we've seen in England and other things that have happened? Well, there's a man who was won the Congressional Medal of Honor. His name is Florent Groberg, who knew exactly what to do. He ran straight at the person. And I don't know if Stacy's going to show a clip of his own testimony about it. We've got a lot of videos today. But one of the things that I want to give you the background about it in case he doesn't say it. He was deployed in Afghanistan in the Kunar province in 2009, and then in 2012. He was helping to escort 2 brigade commanders, 3 battalion commanders, and an Afghan general to a meeting with the Afghan provincial governor when he encountered this suicide bomber, and there was all kinds of service army guys around him. And they went right for it, and he dove on this man who was a suicide bomber, and as soon as he hit the ground, the bomb exploded. And he's still alive to tell about it.
My team of 6 were protecting our brigade commander, and we had an element of 28 coalition forces to include Afghan National Army, and we were in Asadabad, the city of Asadabad, walking in down the street. The way we maneuvered up there, I'd set up a diamond formation. Inside that diamond, I had my VIPs, which included 2 brigade commanders, 3 battalion commanders, an Afghan general. We were going to a security meeting when we were targeted by 2 suicide bombers. They initiated it with motorcycles as a diversion, but upon that situation happening, a man came out of a building. He was walking backwards, which was eerie, and then started walking towards us. I left my post. As I maneuvered towards him, Sergeant Mahoney, to my left, maneuvered with me. I pushed him as hard as I could, and honestly, I just wanted to get him as far away from my guys as possible. And he had a dead man's trigger, which means he had already pressed the trigger prior to walking towards us. And as he hit the ground chest first, he let go of the trigger and he detonated. You know, I remember waking up and my leg had my fibula sticking out, the skin was melting, just blood everywhere. Next thing you know, I was picked up and I was getting statuses on the situation, who was injured and who was killed. And that is when I found out that Command Sergeant Major Griffin, Major Gray, Major Kennedy, and USAID Rafael Abdel Fattah were all killed in action. We defeated the enemy on that day, and we sent a message that no matter how bad you want to hurt us, we're always going to keep standing up, and we're going to bring it back twice as full on you. It was the worst day of my life because even though we defeated the enemy, I lost 4 of my brothers. This medal is not about me, it's about the 4 individuals that I lost. It's about them, it's about their families, it's about true heroes who sacrificed everything for their country. That medal represents them.
And for his valiant effort, he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. A true hero is a person who loves others and is committed to their cause more than he is his own life. You know, with all the things that we watched that are sad this morning, I wanted to give us a story with a happy ending. So I want to talk to you about a man named Gideon. I don't know if any of you have ever read his story. It's in the book of Judges. It's kind of a long, involved story, but I'm going to give you the gist of it this morning because I think there's something that we can take out of that for ourselves today and the kind of Christians we need to be in the way in which we need to live our lives. But Gideon was a man who lived from 1191 to 1144 BC. He lived out his religious and military faith under fire. So many of the people that are Christians that go to war do the same thing. He was a man handpicked by God to undertake a daunting mission that most people said was absolutely, and you will agree when I tell you the story, absolutely suicidal mission for them to die. And yet he trusted that God was with him and that he was be able to take on the Midianites. And I'll tell you that story in a minute. But let me read to you some scripture from Judges chapter 6 to give us background for this. This is the call of Gideon. Like I said, it takes place over a long passage of scripture. I'm not going to read all that today for the sake of time, but this is what happened. The angel of the Lord in Judges chapter 6, verses 11 through 16. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak tree at Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites, who they were under their thumb, basically. And when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." You know what that means? God was buttering him up. So he said, "Well, pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, then why has all this happened to us? Where are all the wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us over to the hands of the Midianites." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of the Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" And then he said, "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." And the Lord said to him, by the way, same thing he said to Moses, "I will be with you. I will strike down the Midianites, leaving none alive." So Gideon was a man who was a judge in his day. This is the period of the judges, or some people call the tribal confederation. And the primary job of a judge was to do two things. Every tribe had at least one judge, the 12 tribes of Israel. They were to muster all the people. You know, they're the ones that get up and say, "It's time to go to battle." And then they also did some judicial kind of judging that went on. The problem with this system was it was taken over later by the kingship, because the problem with this is that nobody's totally in charge. It's just a bunch of 12 people from different clans that get together. But it was good for mustering everybody to war very quickly. And so this is what they did. And the book of Judges records God's encounter with Gideon and his request to give him marching orders to attack the Midianites. And the great task that God gave Gideon to undertake in this battle was associated with that. Here's the problem. Just in Midian alone, the guys that went to war, there's 135,000 of them. And Israel had 32,000 soldiers. Now, do you have to be a military genius to figure out who's going to win that battle? By human means. But according to the book of Genesis, the Midianites were the descendants of Midian, who was the son of Abraham and the wife of Keturah. They had departed from the faith and Yahweh, and because they lived in the land of Canaan, they started serving the Canaanite gods Baal and Asherah. Now, if I was going to apply this today, I want to take a lot of time to do that today, but we live in a society today where there's all kinds of other things to worship to. It isn't just these pagan Canaanite deities today. Israel did sight, the book of Judges says, in the eyes of God for 7 years. Now, God is long-suffering, but he doesn't long-suffer forever. Therefore, he gave them over to the Midianite rule, and they oppressed Israel. And so, in Judges 6:1 says this, "So Israel cried out yet again for deliverance, as they did in the day of Moses." You remember they cried out for hundreds of years then. And the thought occurred to me this morning. Don't you just hate it when the consequences of what you've done in the past catch up with you? That's a bad thing, isn't it? Sometimes. There's a verse in the Bible that says this, "Be sure your sin will find you out." And sometimes people say, "Well, I've been dealing drugs, I've been living life my own way, I've been cheating on my wife, whatever, and the consequences hadn't caught up with me yet." They will. Wait long enough, they will. And so the consequences of what you do, if you put God off and things are going to happen to you you won't like. Because I'm going to tell you one thing. And I learned this a long time ago when I was a young student in Bible college. When you flee from God, ask Jonah, God pursues you. And he will find you, and he will use the circumstances of your life to make you make a decision whether you're going to go his way, you're going to live according to his will, you're going to fight his battles, or you're going to do it on your own strength and do it in your own way. So the Lord spoke to him and said to him, I want you to go. And the first thing the angel said to him was, the Lord is with you. You are a mighty warrior in God's hands. Now, he didn't think of himself as a mighty warrior. He was out there threshing the grain. You know, that's not usually what warriors do. But God said, I know your heart and I know your spirit. And that's one cool thing about warriors, about them sometimes is, it's in their heart. And when the circumstance arises, all of a sudden, that comes out of them and they stand up and they're counted. And the Lord told him, just like I was with Moses, I will be with you. Have you ever felt, now think about your own life for a minute. Have you ever felt outnumbered and overwhelmed by a problem or a challenge in your life? Our first instinct seems to be to run away, to find a way to solve our own problems. But instead of dealing with the battle with God helping us, we want to do it in our own strength. And I learned a long time ago that if you're going to solve major issues in your life or have to deal with major things that come your way, that God wants it to be a joint venture between you and God. Listen, I've sat in the hospital and held the hands of people that had cancer. I had to tell one man he had 3 weeks to live. I've been there with people who've lost. This is the weekend my son died. I've been there with other people whose children have died. I've been there with grieving widows, and I've been there with broken marriage people, and those that have men that have lost their job, and people that have watched their children die in battle, and all the terrible things to do. And I'm going to tell you, God never intended you to fight the battles of your life by your own strength. And the problem is, if you've done that for a while, you know, let me share a Dr. Phil moment with you. How's that working for you? It doesn't work very well, does it? Because God never intended. He intended for you to have His Spirit within you, which makes you that kind of warrior and strong. And whatever it is, God, we've got to go through, we're going to do that. You know, I went into an older lady's house one day, and she had this big picture of the ocean. And in that picture, there was a little boat. And she said, Lord, in the little caption said, Lord, be with me today. The ocean is so big, and my boat is so small. You ever feel like that in your own life, the challenge that you have to have? And you know, God was going to be with Gideon, but I'm going to tell you, when your cause is so compelling and God's voice is so clear, that's when true heroes' character and courage kick in. You know why I know that? Because I'm a history buff. And I saw that when the brave men braved the cold winter at Valley Forge with General George Washington. I've read about the men that took their stand at Gettysburg, the 200 men who fought at the Alamo, the Marines who stormed Mount Suribachi in Iwo Jima, and the 200 men of the 7th Air Cavalry who withstood 1,500 North Vietnamese in the landing zone called X-Ray in the La Drang Valley, and the brave men who stood in Benghazi. By the way, I don't know if you read today, but they lost in court. The families did. The men who took their stand in Benghazi, and all the army and all the people who are taking the fight to ISIS. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about those men in blue that stand every day on our streets, those police people, and stand there, especially those in Chicago, which has the highest crime rate in America today. You see, we all know that freedom isn't free. But in times of peril, real leaders are born, they stand up, and they take the fight to the enemy. Ed's not here today, is he? I don't think, but one of the things that we were talking about one day is that when you're learning to handle a gun and all that, and you find somebody that comes towards you, the first thing you do is you pull out your gun and you go towards them. You take the fight to them. You don't stay on the defensive. You do what you need to do to deal with those things. And that's the way God deals with things. Did you know that? We think God just is up in heaven and just lets everything go. But when you read these great stories of men who did the things that God wanted them to do, they got up, they put their courage, put down their fear, and they did what God wanted them to do. And so freedom isn't free. Just like Fort Groberg, he got up, he went to that person, grabbed him, took him as far away as he could, and he had courage and character to be able to do that. Now, not a lot of the men who have died, obviously, who've done heroic things, get the Medal of Honor, but some people do for the things that they've done. So here's what God said. This is the mission I want to give you. He said, the first thing I want you to do, it's kind of 3 parts. And I don't want to read all the scripture, but the first thing he said was, I want you to sneak in where they have their temple kind of is, where their gods are set up. That's how they did it in those days. And he said, I want you to offer a meal offering to me, Yahweh. In other words, he was saying, I want you to go there and I want you to consecrate this place and this land to me. Then he said, I want you to go and I want you to destroy the Baal and the Asheroth gods on the altar and build one to me and offer a sacrifice of a bull, which is a sin offering, and the installation of an altar to God. This was the cleansing, consecration and cleansing of this area in their lives. These are the things that we do when we come to God too. We consecrate our lives, we cleanse our lives, we get rid of the sin, we dedicated ourselves to God to be able to be used by God in the life in which we live. So he did both these things. And when the Midianites woke up the next day and discovered what had done, that to them in those days was an act of war. So the result was the Midianites got the Amalekites together with them and small other nations and rallied them. And I'm going to tell you, when they came into the land to fight the Israelites, the smell of fear was in the air. And the force was standing at the door. Now, if you're not a very big nation and you're not a very strong person, would that not make you shake in your boots? I'm telling you, it would me. Through a process, and I'm not going to go into the whole process, but God told Gideon to reduce the fighting force down to 300 men. Now, if I was standing against 15,000 plus men and God gave me 300 men, I don't care how good they were, I'd be in a panic. Right? And so that's what he did, probably. He probably panicked. Was he not human? Would you have not said, God, what have you gotten me into? What in the world is going on here? But faith becomes fortitude when you face your fears and you move ahead. How many of you remember the phrase, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead? You ever heard that? That's somebody who's in the face of fear, but his faith turns over. You know who it was? I bet you could never guess whoever said that. The person who said that was the admiral, the first admiral of the United States Navy, David Farragut, in the Battle of Mobile Bay in the Civil War. I didn't know they had torpedoes back then, but they did. Faith becomes fortitude when you face those fears. Now let's make it personal in our own lives. We could say, "Whoa, this is a great story in the Bible. You know, Gideon's standing up for God, and God's called him to do this terrible thing, and he doesn't know what's going to happen, and he's human, but he's trying to have faith." And you know, I've been there before when God's asked me to do certain things that have been very difficult to do, but I did them because God said he'd be with me too. But what happened in that time was he stood up and he was counted. He said, God, I take you at your word. Now let's make it personal for us. What about in our lives? What are the big battles that people face today? Divorce, depression, loss of job, sickness, disability, can't find no health insurance. I'm not going there. No money for retirement. My children are having a problem. I'm getting old. I lost a loved one. We can go on and on. I don't know what it is, but I want you to stop for a moment and ask yourself this poignant question. What is the most difficult thing I'm going through in my life right now? What is it? Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's a struggle in your marriage or your finances, or maybe there's just things, you know, physically in your life you're having a time battling with, and you need somebody to stand there with you. You know, let's make some application. What is our greatest challenge? Are you going to tackle it on your own? Do you see what Gideon was probably thinking of, the million ways that he could make this work? Get other people to help him, try other kinds of methods. He became a great military general. And he thought about all the things they could do. How many swords did they have? How many spears did they have? What could they do to maybe encourage other people to help him? But God said no. He whittled his men down to 300 people. And he's like asking, do you think I can do it or not? Do you think I got to have all this other stuff to make victory in your lives? And I can tell you this, and I bring it up every once in a while about the death of my son. If God can see me through my struggles from that time to this, I know whatever you're facing, God can see you through too. And we need to know that sometimes, don't we? Let me tell you this before I even go any further. The Lord has said to me so many times, the battle is mine. It's ultimately mine. Whether you live or die or you conquer these things, you know, maybe you don't get your prayer answered exactly the way you think it ought to be. But God will win the ultimate war, even if some battles, we're involved in along the way. But like Gideon, it was when you are under fire that the depth of your faith and the resolve of your character gets tested. The way Gideon handled his personal crisis and the battles that he faced are a great model to us today. Now, I'm going to share three things with you real quickly, and then we're going to have one more little video, and then we're going to go. They sound very simplistic to you. That's because I made them that way. but they are very profound, and they are very optimal for you winning the battles in your life. The first one is this. He needed God's presence to override his sense of personal panic. Have you ever panicked? I remember there was one time in my life, I'm not telling you about it, I had one time in my life that I panicked so bad that I hyperventilated and didn't think I'd ever be able to breathe again. You ever been there? When something's so out of your control and you don't know what's going to happen next, and all you can do is hyperventilate, and somebody gives you a bag? The second thing is he needed to accept God's plan instead of trusting in his own, his own way of doing things. Sometimes God's going to give you solutions to your problem that you don't even probably know or wouldn't come up with yourself or maybe even understand. You might even question why he's doing the things that. Do you think that Gideon questioned what God was doing here? Absolutely, no doubt. Third thing, he needed to follow God's prescribed strategy. You know what I do when I go through difficult times? In times past, I try not to do it so much anymore, but I decide that, you know what? God's not with me, so I have to make up my own strategy. I'm going to go out, I'm having financial problems, I'm going to go borrow more money. Is that the right thing to do? Or, whatever it might be in your life, whatever things you're dealing with, I'm getting old now. I said the other day, I'm getting old now, I'm just going to sit on the couch all day. All those things that we deal with. Let me tell you about number one. He needed God's presence to override his own sense of panic. Isn't it interesting that when we deal with real challenges in our life, first we panic, then we plot, and when all else fails, we pray? Now let's be honest. Are we not like that? See, men always say, don't worry about it, I can fix it. Men are great fixers, unfortunately. Unfortunately, they're legends in their own mind about fixing some things. And I thought to myself today, my, how so many people I know who've been through struggles become schemers, stopgap planners, and Band-Aid people. They think, well, if I can just keep the effects down a little while, maybe, like my chiropractor has on his wall. Yeah, just thinking your pain will go away. Yeah, just keep thinking that. It'll go away by itself. We need God's presence to override our sense of panic in the things that we do. The Midianites were a threat. This was no joke. He faced an overwhelming task, and God said to him, I will be with you. I will help you fight the faith. But you're the one's got to go out and do the battle. And that's a hard thing for some people. And this is what he said. Remember back in Judges 6:15, but pardon me, Lord. How can I save Israel? I'm a weak guy. I'm part of a weak nation. My family isn't strong. And God said, you're missing the point of it all. It isn't about you. It's about me. And that's the message of this morning. It isn't about what you can do. It's about what God can do through you. Because God says, I'll surely be with you. He told Moses that. Moses said, I can't speak well. They won't believe me. And when God called him to deliver Israel, he gave him a whole laundry list of excuses. And God said, Moses, it's about me. You're just my instrument. You've got to keep your eyes focused on me. And one of the things that I like about this is we need to be people who learn to get on our knees until the burden lifts, until we realize that God's going to be there and he's going to see me through. That's what takes care of your panic. Because if you're like me, I can think of 1,000 scenarios of stuff that can go wrong, right? And Murphy's Law would agree with me about that. But the best feeling in the world is to have assurance that when life is out of control, God is still in control. I'm looking at amen that for me. Yeah. Isn't that good? I don't know, maybe you've never been in a life when your life's been out of control. Out of control means there's stuff I can't do on my own, but God will have to do it for me if it's going to get done. It's always a joint venture, though. It's always his grace and your grit. You got to do that. But number two, he said Gideon needed to accept God's plan instead of trusting in his own resources. Gideon accepted and undertook God's plan and did not plan his own way of action. And, leaders are known for thinking, you think men have the I can fix it ideal? Leaders do that a lot. Now, what happens later on, after the judges period is gone, you have the kings. They thought the kings would be a better idea. The first king of Israel was named Saul. And God said to Saul, when you attack the Amalekites, I want you to wipe them out completely. And he didn't do it. And Samuel the prophet came and said, what have you done? You've disobeyed God. God told you to do something, and now you lost. You won the battle, but you lost the war because you were disobedient to God, because he decided to do it his own way. And because of that reason, that's the first reason, not the only reason. First reason, that Samuel the prophet looked at him and said, because you have done it your way instead of God's way, God has ripped the kingdom from your hand. And he did. And David took his place later on. And that's what happens when we have our own plan and we trust in our own methods and our own schemes to do that. Now, if you read in chapter 6, verse 12, it says, the army was approaching. They were as thick as locusts. I was in North Dakota once, and there was a locust storm. The locusts came to all the crops. Oh, my gosh, you couldn't even see your face in front of you hardly. Talk about pestilence. That's a terrible thing to do. And he said, but Gideon, don't be too excited. Let me give you the plan, the battle plan. You know, all good generals have battle plans, right? He says, here's what I want you to do. And I want you to put yourself in Gideon's spot now. God said, guess what? Good news, I got a plan for you. He says, okay, good. What's the plan? He said, I'm going to give you trumpets to blow, empty jars to break open, and when it gets time, we want you to yell something at the people when you attack them. I can just see Gideon almost saying to himself, oh my God, this is the walls of Jericho all over again. Remember what God said in the walls of Jericho? Here was Joshua. He's probably the greatest commander of Israel of all time. You know, superseded Moses, brought the people into the promised land. You've got catapults and swords and spears and all this great strategy. And God said, no, I just want you for, 7 days to walk around the wall and blow trumpets and break pots and yell. You can imagine what a real military. Try saying that to, Schwarzkopf back in the day, something like that. And they did it and the walls fell down. And he said, oh, great, now what am I going to do? So understanding that God's ways are not our ways, and although to him it seemed like a crazy suicide mission because he was human, but if the battle is successful, then there's only one person you can give praise to, because you can't do it with 300 men that are scared to death, with people that are thick as locusts. And so the same thing that happened with the Battle of Jericho happened here, because when they ended up, in a minute I'll tell you about winning the war, they won the war, and they realized they give God all the credit because he's the one that wins the battles. Now, when is that lesson going to be learned by a lot of church folks? We don't fight the ultimate battle. We just cooperate with God, and then we give him the glory. As we get in trouble, we start patting ourselves on the back. So, he needed to pray. He needed God's plan. And then he needed God's prescribed strategy. That was the third thing. Any of you know what Proverbs 3, 4, and 5 say? If you don't know it, you should memorize it. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Upon Gideon's command, those men snuck up on all those guys who were sleeping at night. Ever been sleeping at night and somebody's woken you up in a fierce way? I did it one time and I knocked somebody out. No kidding. I hit him because I was so scared to death. So upon Gideon's command, all the men snuck up and into the enemy's camp at night, and blew the trumpets, broke the pots, and shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. And the people were so disoriented, they woke up, they were confused, they started killing each other. And they ran them all the way to the next state, so to speak, and they wiped them all out because of that. And so I can just see God debriefing this battle, saying, now, let me see, you had all these thoughts of how you were going to do it. Let me remind you of a couple of things. Number one, we won this battle with my crazy strategy and plan. We didn't have to raise one sword or spear to them, and we didn't lose one man. Now, I'd call that being a pretty successful general, wouldn't you? Doing it God's will and God's way. When will we ever learn that the battle belongs to the Lord, and so do our battles? See, here's the thing I want you to get out of this message more than anything else. Not just what a great guy Gideon was, and how he overcame his fears. He showed courage like so many of the military men do. But here's the real issue, and I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to have you repeat it with me. It is not the size of your battle that matters. It's the size of your God. Amen. Say that with me. It's not the size of your battle. It's the size of your God. And when you go through a difficult time, you repeat those words back to yourself. It isn't the difficulty of the task. It isn't the difficulty of the situation. It's the size of your God.